Didion calls herself a native daughter of California in the first collection of essays she published in 1976, only to undermine her own sense of belonging in the last collection, in which she returns to these ideas, where I was from, posing the pressing question, where will I be from? These 2 points mark the trajectory of her probing of the issue of California identity and its roots that Didion locates in the frontier. In between these extremes, Didion conducts a vigorous examination of the sense of the West, from the first novel she published, Run River, in 1963, to The Last Thing He Wanted, in 1996. Didion weaves in her concern about what, in fact, it means to be Californian. Run River's protagonists are Lily McClellan and her husband. In Didion's own words, as the novel opens, Lily's husband, Everett McClellan, has just shot and killed the man with whom both Lily and his sister Martha have had affairs. Didion also comments on the pervasive atmosphere of her first novel. Much in Run River, as I believed when I was writing it, and as I read it now, some 4 decades later, has to do with the ways California was or is changing, the detailing of which permeates the novel with a tenacious, and as I see it now, pernicious, mood of nostalgia. Martha, Lily, and Everett are representatives of the old California, which changes and passes into oblivion, giving rise to new modes of existence. Lily and Everett's son Knight expresses this change when he talks about his parents' rigidity. She and his father were going to be pretty surprised if and when they ever woke up to the fact that nobody in Sacramento anymore had even heard of the McClellans or the Knights, nor that he thought they ever would wake up. They'd just go right along, dedicating their grubby goddamn camellia trees in Capitol Park to the memory of their grubby goddamn pioneers. Didion herself comments on this fragment. There are other signs of change, which, in the construct of the novel, is understood to mean decline. Didion's first novel could be seen as a melancholic examination of loss. The loss of an unshaken sense of belonging, the loss of an easily defined place to belong to, and the loss of the right to feel at home in this place. Didion's last novel, The Last Thing He Wanted, similarly features Californians as protagonists, even though they are out in the world dealing with larger affairs. In this political thriller, Elena McMahon, the novel's central character, becomes an arms dealer in Central America after her father's death. The phrase, repeated several times, characteristically is the smell of jasmine, the pull of blue jacaranda petals on the sidewalk, blue so intense you could drown in it. We read it at least 3 times in the course of the narrative, and each instance provides a point of reference, an anchoring sensation for Elena, who might be dealing arms on an island on the Pacific, but who remains a Californian, with the character of a survival and an instinct to jettison any cargo, which occasionally means emotional baggage. This characterization of a Californian character through loss is also very clearly delineated in Didion's autobiographic writing, in terms which are very clearly reminiscent of Elena McMahon, the protagonist of her last novel. Didion also describes her own mother and all their ancestors. My mother had no interest in keeping the Hill Ranch, or in fact, any California land. California, she said, was now too regulated, too taxed, too expensive. She spoke enthusiastically, on the other hand, about moving to the Australian outback. Ed Wayne, my father would say, a remonstration. I would, she would insist, reckless. Just leave California? Give it all up? In a minute, she would say, the pure strain talking, Elizabeth Scott's great-great-great-great-granddaughter. Just forget it. But it is not only loss in the social and historical sense that emerges quite clearly at the core of Didion's writing. The personal dimension of loss is represented there as well. This more intimate dimension of loss is visible especially in her more recent texts, composed as a response to personal bereavement. But also her earlier prose is permeated by a sense of demise and deficiency. She started her career as a novelist, writing about the land of her childhood that seemed lost to her when she moved to the East Coast. All of her characters experience loss and grieve others. Run River commences with a shot that reverberates throughout the narrative, a shot that kills the protagonist's husband. At the center of Play It As It Lays, there is a loss entailed in an abortion. Both A Book of Common Prayer and Democracy mourn the loss of a child, either to history or, in a very real sense, to the cessation of biological functions. In the last novel, the protagonist of The Last Thing He Wanted loses her father and her own life. When Didion confesses, "I think I write romances," one cannot take it to expect happy endings. On the contrary, her novels, much like her journalism, possess a pervasive sense of loss that lies at the foundations of her melancholy landscape of California. But the centrality of melancholic loss is not recognizable only in her novels. Didion situates loss at the core of selfhood in her autobiographical texts as well. In the text I've already referenced, Where I Was From, she claims, "Me is what we think when our parents die." And she poses questions that seem to be driving her prose. Who will look out for me now? Who will remember me as I was? Who will know what happens to me now? Where will I be from? The parents' deaths break the link between the self and the place of origin. The anchoring in the land is lost, just as the past is lost. The curious future tense form of the last phrase, "Where will I be from?" suggests a radical break with the land of birth, but also a relativity of origin, if I can be from somewhere else in the future than I am now. There is no promise of the termination of melancholy. The question, "Where will I be from?" signals some confusion about Didion's own identification that surfaces occasionally in her prose. Two of her most moving and widely read volumes, The Year of Magical Thinking and Blue Nights, are meditations on personal losses, the former of her husband and the latter of her daughter. Yet, however intimate such memoirs seem to be, Didion still returns to the same events that she wrote about half a century earlier, this time, however, with her characteristic coolness and wry humor. We moved to New York, where in fact I had lived before, from the time I was 21 and just out of the English department at Berkeley and starting work at Vogue. A segue so profoundly unnatural that when I was asked by the Condé Nast personnel department to name the languages in which I was fluent, I could think only of Middle English. Until I was 29 and just married, where I have lived again since 1988. Why then do I say I lived much of this time in California? Why then did I feel so sharp a sense of betrayal when I exchanged my California driver's license for one issued by New York? In the text about a profound loss, a meditation upon the nature of mourning, Didion returns to the issue of California and belonging there, asking questions that remain unanswered. These doubts, why did I feel this way, imply that the basis of the feeling of belonging to a place is not necessarily the time spent there, and that the physical separation does not generate a feeling of disloyalty as much as a symbolic act confirming one's belonging. Didion's astonishment continues. Could I seriously have construed changing my driver's license from California to New York as an experience involving severed emotional bonds? Did I seriously see it as loss? Did I truly see it as separation? She never gives answers to these queries, for there might be none. The posed problems are ones of veracity and of labeling one's experience as serious and true. In other words, she might be asking herself if what she is experiencing is only an illusion, impossible to tell apart from reality, if such a notion is applicable at all. The sense of a loss gains concreteness through the fact that it is the only factor of which one can be certain. Didion's I speaker in her memoirs is often hesitant and ambivalent, but it is also thanks to these qualities that she is able to bring out much detail and nuance in her musing on the nature of loss and mourning. Ambivalence also applies to the relationship her characters have with California, and in turn the relationship that Didion's journalistic eye exhibits in her essays. It is a place lost in memory, constructed in numerous comparisons with the Garden of Eden that Didion and other Californian writers executed, and yet it is highly evasive. In at least one respect, California resembles Eden. It is assumed that those who absent themselves from its blessings have been banished, exiled by some perversity of heart. The perversity she mentions suggests that leaving California is abnormal. If it is done voluntarily, then it must be succeeded by forceful removal of affection. Historically, seeing California as ambivalent is justifiable. Ambiguity of historical identification is clearly recognizable on the level of official narrative. After the acquisition of California by the United States, California becomes American, yet its separateness in its status as the last frontier remains evident. Its meaning retains ambiguity. It promises land for settlement, yet it signals the closure of continental expansion. It is American with Mexican customs, Mexican history, and a Mexican Spanish-speaking minority. It also retains its mythical character, with the 49ers, the gold rush, later Hollywood, and now Silicon Valley, animating people's imagination and becoming a projection of dreams on a global scale. Didion understands both California's ambiguity and mythopoetic quality better than anybody else.